Welcome to this Daily Meditations author interview. My name is Mark Longhurst. I'm the publications manager at the CAC, and today I have the great joy of speaking with the author, storyteller, and poet, Kaitlin Curtice. Kaitlin is an enrolled citizen in the Potawatomi Nation, and she writes at the intersection of indigenous spirituality, identity, and how we can heal from the impact of colonization. We have quoted Kaitlin's work in the Daily Meditations. She has written for the CAC journal Wanting, and today we're speaking about her latest book, Everything is a Story. Kaitlin, thank you so much for taking the time to be in conversation.
Oh, Chimigwech, thank you so much for having me.
Well, your book, Everything is a Story, is about the power of stories, and you are a storyteller. You tell stories. So what does storytelling mean to you, and what are you hoping readers will take away from this book?
Oh, that's a great question. Storytelling is kind of the life pulse of everything. And I was so excited to write this book because, I've been writing for about a decade now and have been writing about the power of stories. So it was really wonderful to actually focus in my energy on the power of storytelling and the reality that stories are everywhere and that they make up the whole world around us. So it was such a gift to do that. And I hope that people just jump in with me and go on the journey of exploring stories and exploring the option that stories are living beings that are a part of our world and that we get to encounter and sort of partner with along the way. I hope that people just have room to expand and ask questions of what stories mean to them and how they interact with them. That was really my goal behind writing the book, and I loved writing it, and I hope that people really enjoy reading it.
Oh, gosh, I love thinking about stories as living beings. And one of the metaphors that you use throughout the book that I really appreciated was that of an oak tree, mirroring the life cycle of a story. What can you tell us about oak trees, acorns, and what it means to have a life cycle of a story?
Yeah. So when I decided to write the book, a lot of my last 3 books have sort of had a framework so that I could follow something and sort of put the stories into this framework. And so with this book, I came up with this idea: what if I could use the life cycle of an oak tree? I really love oak trees. I really have a special relationship to acorns. And so I thought, what if I could explore the life cycle of a story with the life cycle of an oak tree, and that could be my framework? And when I thought of it, I really hoped it would work, and I think it did. So I was really excited, and it was so much fun to gather books on oak trees and on the power of oak trees. Oak trees are such a universal symbol of strength and power, but also, acorns and the oak tree literally have provided for people all over the world, across history, across the centuries. We have used oak trees. We have used oak gall for ink. We have used acorn meal to eat. We've used oak to build things with. So it is such a universal symbol, and it's in so many myths and stories around the world that I thought it was just a really great way to explore that. So, oak trees start from the very tiny acorn, the seed, and stories also start as a seed. They are sort of born at one point and then grow. And I wanted to find a way to move them together. And I really enjoyed, using that metaphor and pairing these things together that people might not have considered, and thought that maybe that would be a fun way to explore storytelling.
That metaphor of stories as mirroring the life of an oak tree did help me receive it as a living being and really enter into that invitation. So I loved that. And you also talk about how stories can be harmful or healing. They're not neutral. There are liberating stories. There are oppressive stories. So how do we discern which stories to let go of and which to keep?
Yeah, it's a great question. I decided to kind of, in one of the early chapters, give a way to sort of label or categorize stories, although, labels only help us to a certain extent, that not everything can be labeled or put in these boxes, right? We know that, but it is helpful to sort of look at stories and ask questions about them, to sort of look at them from different angles. So I write about lethal, loving, and liminal stories. So what stories are truly loving? What stories are lethal and oppressive? And what stories are liminal where we don't really know yet. And I think that asking from those lenses, I hope will kind of help people look at a story, but what stories are rooted in kinship and care and this expansive way of seeing the world and love? What stories are rooted in hate, in oppression and pain in the world? Some stories we know bring harm. And, at the end of the book, I write that stories never really die. They're just composted back to the earth, and like acorns are. And I think that was a really important thing for me, in that even the really awful stories we've carried on, or the very, in my work, the very colonial stories we've passed on in our history books or in our society, those stories linger in our air for a long time. But can we sort of compost them? Can we tell stories from the oppressed, or tell stories from the people who haven't been heard from? Can we tell stories that bring solidarity and care to them? So, and it's complex. Again, there are liminal stories where we don't quite know, where we're still trying to figure things out. And I also wanted to hold room for that too, because a lot of us are just trying to figure out what it means to be human. And we're trying to sift through the countless stories, even in our social media feeds. We are constantly like rifling through stories, trying to figure out what is true, what is not true, what do we believe, what do we dismiss. And that's a really exhausting thing to do. So if we can sort of ground ourselves in asking what these stories do in the world, how they're affecting people and the earth, maybe that will help us know sort of what to do with them.
One way that you expressed a vision of a loving story is talking about hearing from creation, that nature and trees and land and water, they all have stories to tell us. What can we learn, or how would you describe how we might begin listening to stories that nature might be telling us?
Yeah. Someone asked me recently, how do you approach people who are really uncomfortable with this idea that the world is alive? Or, how do you help people see things in a different way who just don't see that? And I was talking about how language that I might use for people who are really uncomfortable with this idea is that of becoming more childlike, or becoming curious about the world again. If we can, I would say curiosity, childlikeness, and humility, because we live in such a society where we want that. We want our pride, and we want even the puffed up sort of ego. We want the accolades. We want this showiness. And there is something really powerful about being humble, about being curious, about not being afraid to show childlikeness or awe with the world. And that is such a great portal through which to begin that journey, in seeing, that the earth has so much to teach us, that Sugamakwe, or Mother Earth, has so much to give to us, that there are stories all around us. So many of my poems are written when I'm outside and I have an encounter with the world around me, and I take that with me and it becomes a poem. And I think that we all have that inside of us. We're made for that, to engage with the world around us in a sacred way. And if it's hard for people to get there, I think just thinking about what we were like as children, or thinking about what it might mean to just ask a few more questions than we normally do, maybe that would help us sort of walk through that portal.
The invitation to enter into childlike wonder as a way of participating and discovering this larger kinship story. I'll take that with me. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, too, about the daily meditations theme. We have a theme each year for these daily meditations. This year's theme is being salt and light. And we're taking our inspiration from Jesus' words, where he tells his followers, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." As I was thinking about the themes of your book alongside the theme, one way that we might understand what Jesus is up to is telling a story. He's maybe telling a story about what a renewed community, and with each other and with the planet, might look like. And since you write about the power of stories to shape our communities, how might this theme of being salt and light serve as a healing and liberating story, a loving story, as opposed to a lethal or one of the other
Right.
stories.
I really love that. It actually does remind me of what I've written about, even the power of stories in the oak tree metaphor. So, you know, I think about like sky and ground. So the salt in the ground and the sky above us, the light. That with sky and ground, being grounded, the beauty of oak trees is that they have these really incredible root systems. And then they have the trunk of the tree that is huge. And then they go up to their canopies, which shelter and hold all sorts of animals and give us shade, and they give us air. So it's that provision in the world that they have this deep rootedness with each other in their ground, in their salt, but also like up in the tops of who they are in the light. They're also giving such care to the world around them. And I think it's the same with our stories, that our stories are of the earth, that they're born in the dirt, that they're born in the world around us, but they also have this mystical mythology. Stories are narratives, and they're beautiful, and metaphor is so beautiful and rich. And so they kind of go beyond us. We talk about, like, in Celtic spirituality, the other world, or in indigenous spirituality, like these spaces that are beyond us, thin places in Celtic mythology. So this world that is beyond us, that we don't always understand, but gives such beautiful story. I think as humans, we are drawn to that. So how do we like tether ourselves in the earth, but also hold onto the power of myth and story that is beyond us, and be okay with the mysterious? I think that that's important. And I think that we are sort of the best version of ourselves as humans when we understand that we are connected to the world and to one another and to ourselves. And we're also connected to the things we don't understand, to the sacred, to what is beyond us. And I think that in that space, we find healing for ourselves and with one another.
You use poetry throughout your work just in such a beautiful way. I experienced it as a contemplative interlude to help me slow down, digest what you're writing about, and also to pay attention to my embodied experience in reading the book. So I would love to ask if you would close our conversation together with reading a poem.
Yeah,
Would you
I
be
would
willing
love
to do that?
I write these poems, I put them into my books in these different spots, and I say that I do that to help people sort of take a breath. And I love that phrase that you use, because that's exactly what it is for. So much of my writing is heavy. It's on topics like empire and colonialism and the ways that we harm one another. But poetry is so powerful to help us pause and see things differently. And so I always want to put poetry into my books so that we can also hold that like deep breath with one another. So I really love that. I'll read this poem. It's actually from the very beginning of the book, from chapter 1. And this is a special poem. It's sort of, it came from this retreat. I opened talking about this retreat that I went to a few years ago, when a friend of mine compared me to this acorn that she had seen in the desert in New Mexico. And I held on to that story. So when I knew I wanted to use the oak tree imagery in the book, I knew I wanted to share about this moment where I felt really connected to the acorn, and wanted my readers to also feel like we are all connected to this acorn imagery. A friend once told me I was a lot like an acorn, expanding beyond its bud with effortless potential. If an acorn is the beginning, so is a story. And if I am an acorn, I too am waiting to be told. So then are you an acorn, growing through your beginnings and making your way into new phases of fullness every day, making your way toward the mighty oak, the elder of all elders. We are stories, seeds, beginnings, the blessed essence of what it means to be human, growing seasonally until we find our way back to the holy compost pile. We are the seeds, the stories, the changing landscapes, the longing and hope of all future days.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that and inviting us both into the possibility of an acorn and the reality of the compost pile.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining this conversation, Kaitlin.
Thank you for having me.